When implementing security for your network, many times access control list or firewall will be your options. Before we go to the details for this video's topic about ACL, let's first compare these two. Before UniFi released several layer 3 switches, in the past we only had layer 2 choices. I don't see any official documents from Ubiquiti, but at least from what I observed, I am unable to log on to the layer 2 switch and run the command line tools for the ACL control. So I suppose it's not available for layer 2 UniFi switches. But for firewall, you either use, let's say like me, I use pfSense, but you may use Ubiquiti UDM or UDM Pro. They have built-in firewalls. For normal layer 2 switches, you use firewall to secure your network. With the new layer 3 enabled UniFi switches, now you have two different options to use ACL, at least in a very low-level technical way. I have a question mark here. We will discuss that later in the last section, but here let's say yes, it's kind of available, but if you let the switch manage your VLANs, your traffic won't go through your original firewall. Yes, you can still define all your firewall rules like you did before, but it's just they won't be effective because the traffic won't go there at all. For UniFi layer 3 switches, for Inter-VLAN traffic, your firewall won't work. Now let's talk about stateful and stateless. When we say stateless, we mean the packet inspection is based on per packet. When we say stateful, that means the packet inspection is based on your flow, so it can remember your previous status. Because the nature of ACL is stateless, but your firewall has more ability to do this stateful packet inspection. ACL is stateless here. On one hand, it will use less memory and it will be faster, but on the other hand, it will not be able to do something which you can do in firewall. Now let's move on to the graphical UI part. Again, I don't see any official document from Ubiquiti, but at least I don't see anything in UniFi controller to do the ACL control. Yeah, when it comes to firewall, like me, I use pfSense. Of course, you can do it on the web UI. Now let's talk about the most frustrating part. Ubiquiti's Edge switch product line has very good command line support, and Ubiquiti also has very good documentations. Ubiquiti doesn't have similar document for UniFi, and some of UniFi switches inherited some command line interface tools from Edge switch, but there's no any official documents talking about them, about whether they will continue to be supported or they just happen to be left there, but someday they will be removed. So it will be risky if you use some command line features without any official support. But for me, I'm a home user. It doesn't really matter as long as it works for me now, and I simply wait for new future release or I stick to whatever I have. In this video, I'm going to use this USW Enterprise XG24 as the testing switch. It is a layer 3 supporting switch. I already configured two VLANs within this switch, VLAN 100 and VLAN 200. The Inter-VLAN switching is already enabled. There's another VLAN one, which is the default LAN used in this video, because first I used this Mac to take this video, so I need to remotely log on to this Mac to take some screenshot, so I need network connection. And secondly, sometimes I also need to ping the machines in VLAN 100 as part of the testing. So in total we have 3 VLANs. I use pfSense as the router, but for the purpose of this video, it doesn't really matter what's the firewall or what's the router you use. It should work the same way. Let's go to UniFi controller to check the network settings first. Pay attention to 3 networks. First, the default LAN is managed using router. In my case, it's pfSense. These two, VLAN 100 and 200, they are the special VLANs I configured to use this USW Enterprise XG as the gateway. This switch will support the Inter-VLAN switching for these VLANs. And I won't go to the details of the setting. If you are interested, you can check my another video in my channel. So now we have VLAN 100, VLAN 200 already configured. Now let's go to the switch itself to see the different parts. This is the UniFi controller for this Enterprise XG switch. The first two blue parts, they are configured using the VLAN 100 port profile. These two are related to these two machines. The first one is Synology NAS, the other one is a PC. And this light blue part is connected to the Mac, and which has VLAN 1, the default LAN. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I cannot find any documentation from Ubiquiti about the UniFi Layer 3 Acl control. All I demo in this video will be based on the information in this Ubiquiti documentation. It's for Edge switch command line reference, and starting from page 386, there are two sections about MAC ACL and IP ACL. I simply tried the different combinations of the parameters, try to figure out how it works in the UniFi world. That's how I came up with the video materials. During the testing, I'm going to split my screen into 4 areas. In the upper left, you have the simplified diagram, and for this terminal window, I'm going to log on to the UniFi switch using SSH. For this terminal, I'm going to log on to this VLAN 200 MacBook so that I can try different ping commands to see whether I can block the connection, right? In this terminal, sometimes I will directly do some ping operations from the VLAN 1, the default LAN, and to validate some more complicated ACL scenarios. Now let me first log on to the VLAN 200 MacBook from this terminal. Okay, we are in. In this terminal window, I will SSH into this USW Enterprise XG switch. Okay, I'm in. Before making configuration changes, let's first validate whether we can successfully reach to these two machines from VLAN 200. Let me ping them from this terminal window. Remember, this is from this MacBook. First, ping the Synology. Yes, I can ping it, no problem. Then try the PC. Yes, no problem. And then let me try whether I can access internet from VLAN 200 now. Let me ping Google. Okay, no problem. So everything works fine at this moment in this VLAN and in this VLAN. Now let's try the first part, the MAC access control list. In the top right terminal, we already SSH into the switch. But to start the ACL configuration, we need several extra steps. First, we need to telnet to itself. Input command enable, en for short. Now you see the prompt is changed. Now it's in so-called privileged mode. The next command is called config for short. See the additional brackets here. Now it's in a special mode. It's called configuration mode. We are ready to start the Mac ACL config. Since we are working on Mac access control list, first we need to know the MAC addresses for all the devices. Of course, there are a lot of ways to find them out, but the easiest way is we are already in the UniFi CLI interface, so we can run this command, show MAC address table. And it's a long list, but Luckily, we know these two devices and this MacBook, they are in either VLAN 100 or 200. So in the result, as you can see, there are still a lot of other pages, and the first column is VLAN. It's sorted by VLAN ID. So let me continue till we find 100. Okay, we see 100 and 200. Apparently, these entries are the ones we are interested in. So basically, the first one, 261C, that's my Synology. I already noted down. And then the second one, that's for this PC. And the 14, 15, this is the MacBook's MAC address. Oh, I already note all three MAC addresses down, so we are good to proceed. Now let's start the first real configuration command. We need to first create a so-called MAC address list extended. So it's MAC access list extended. And here you need to give it a name. It's case sensitive. Let me name it as Mac Acl. Before I paste the command, see the prompt is changed. Now you are not only in config mode, you are in a sub mode, if you will. It's config Mac access list mode. So let me paste the command. It's successful already. But let's examine. Say I want to deny any, which is the source, and then followed by the MAC address, which is the target. This MAC address is the MAC address for the Synology. So what I'm saying is I do not want any other computers access this Synology, but I don't care about this PC. That's what I want to say here. And the very last part, that's the all zero part. Basically, that's the MAC mask. In IP world, we are familiar with all the different masks, for example, subnet mask. But for Mac world, I'm not sure, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it's really very useful, because when you want to use mask, you want to do some wildcard configuration, filtering, right? But the MAC address is so random, if you will. How can you use any reasonable wildcard using the mask? But anyway, the all zero means I just want to use this particular exact matching MAC address. This is not done yet. This is just the first line of the rule. Let me import the second line. In the end, we want to permit any. We simply want to prevent access to this Synology NAS, but for any other accesses that's allowed. Yep, it's successful. Then we exit. See the prompt is changed. Now we are back to the config mode. We already successfully created a access list. It's not effective yet. We haven't associated it with any interface or any VLAN yet. So next, we want to use another command. Before examining this command, let's first take a look at the left side. Let's talk about what we want to achieve using this MAC access control list. For VLAN 100, we do not want this Synology NAS to be the target of the access. Let's go back to the right side. Let's see what's this command. The command name is called MAC access group. Then you give it the access control list, which was we just created here, and then we say VLAN. Now we need to give it the VLAN ID. From this diagram, you can see the VLAN ID is 100. Then the last part is very crucial. It's either in or out. If it's the first time you see this command, it might be difficult to understand what in and out means. If you associate an access list inbound to a VLAN, the access control list will filter traffic coming from the devices on that VLAN. But if you associate a access control list outbound with a VLAN, that access control list will filter traffic going to the devices on that VLAN. So that's exactly what we want to do. That's why we want to specify outbound here. Now let's proceed. Let's display the effective ACL. So I type in this command, show MAC access list mac_acl, which we just created and then applied. Here it displays the name and it's outbound, and it's applied to VLAN 100. You can see two different sequences. So the first one is the one we created for deny, and the second one is the permit. This is the MAC address for this Synology, and this is a mask. It's all 0, means I only want to filter on this exact MAC address. See the second one, because we say permit any, it match all. It's very straightforward. Now we are ready to validate whether the MAC works or not. Let me go to this terminal. See here from the prompts, you can see I'm already in this MacBook. Let me try to ping the two different IP addresses in VLAN 100. First, the Synology. I cannot ping it. That's good. Then let's try the other one, which is the PC. It still works, so everything's working as expected. Let me see whether I can still access internet. No problem. Great. So now we can finish the first part, which is the relatively easier, the MAC ACL part, because the way to filter devices using the mask is not very convenient. At least I like the IP ACL way. So let's talk about that in more detail. We need to first clean up the MAC ACL we just created. So let me use this command. Okay. As you can see, the command is almost the same as the one we used to create this ACL. The only difference is I add a no before it. That's a kind of funny way to delete something, but basically that's the syntax. So you say no something, then it will reverse it. Try to show the command again, which we executed here. Let me do it. Okay, it says the access list doesn't exist, and to validate it, let me ping the Synology NAS. Okay. Now I can ping it, right? So that means, yes, the ACL get removed. For IP access control list, I would like to use 3 different scenarios to go into more details. First, let's take a look at the diagram. What I want to achieve is this switch has 2 VLANs configured, but I want to completely block the Inter-VLAN switching from the VLAN 200 to VLAN 100. Let's see how we can achieve that using IP ACL. If you check the Ubiquiti's Edge switch CLI documentation, you can find that the syntax for IP ACL is very close to MAC ACL. So let me first create a IP ACL. I use IP access list and then give it a name. It's case sensitive. The name is IP_ACL. We are done. Then let me type a command to deny the VLAN traffic from VLAN 200. Okay. This is the command. Similarly to the MAC ACL, so I say deny, but this time is IP, and then I use this VLAN 200's IP address, but the last part is 0, and then I give it a mask. This is a problem I have been facing. According to Ubiquiti's document, here I'm supposed to give the wildcard mask. The mask is not the subnet mask. I'm supposed to give the inverse value of the network mask. That's how the system used that mask to do the IP filtering. But I tried that. For example, according to the document, I'm supposed to give a 0.0.0.255 as the mask. I did that, it doesn't work. So that's why I have to use this mask, and then internally the system will use the correct inverse value. So we will check that later. I don't know whether I did anything wrong or Ubiquiti changed some implementation for this particular command. I'm not sure what's the reason, but anyway, just by following the documentation, it doesn't work. This way it works. For the mask, I use the mask which is exactly the same as the subnet mask. This is the source IP. Now we are in the destination IP section. I give it the VLAN 100 IP, and similarly I give the mask here. This is the very first sequence. Now we need another sequence, which is permit IP. The source is any, the destination is any. What I'm saying is, okay, only block the access from VLAN 200. Don't block anything else. Now we are done. Let's exit the config IP ACL mode. Now we are back to the normal configuration mode. Let's associate this ACL with a VLAN. This is the command I'm going to use. Let's examine it carefully. I say IP access group followed by the IP ACL I just created, followed by the keyword VLAN. Here I say VLAN 200. Then I say in. Remember in the Mac ACL section we talked about what the inbound and outbound means. Here the in means this ACL will be applied to the IP addresses from this VLAN. That's exactly what we want to do, because we want to say from the VLAN 200 we want to block the access. That's what the VLAN 200 in means here. Now we have created the ACL and associated with the VLAN 200. Then let's display what's the effective IP ACL here. We have the name here and it's inbound. It applies to VLAN 200 and it has two sequences. First one is deny. See, the protocol is IP. The source is the one I give. See here, this is the one, the mask I just talked about. The official name is called Wildcard Mask. This is the inverse value of the subnet mask. So remember I mentioned according to the documentation, when I run the command, I'm supposed to give this value. But if I really give this value, the system will inverse it. And here it will become the subnet mask, which doesn't work, right? It's not the wildcard mask. Wildcard mask should be like this. But at least in my experience, when I run the ACL creation command, I have to use the subnet mask to make it work. If you know the reason why I encountered this situation or your experience is different, please comment under this video so that I can get it more clarified. Again, it's pretty straightforward. The only special thing is the wildcard mask. This ACL is supposed to be effective in this switch. Let me try it. Remember, these two blocks are what we want to achieve. First, ping the Synology. Okay, great. I cannot ping it. Then let me try the PC. That's expected. I cannot ping it. According to the IP ACL, I only block access from VLAN 200. In this system diagram, I also have another machine, which is the Mac Mini I'm using now, which is this terminal window. This was not supposed to be blocked. Let me try it. Let me use this terminal session and let me ping the same Synology. See, I can ping it, no problem. Then let me try the PC. Yep, similarly, I can ping it. That worked exactly the way we want it to work. So it only blocks access from this VLAN, nothing else. Great. Let me move on to the next scenario. In this scenario, let's do it a little bit differently. So from VLAN 200, we want to block the access to Synology NAS, but we still want to keep the access to the PC. Let's see how I can do it. I won't explain all the details like the previous scenario. Let me paste the list of commands and then we can go through them one by one. First, I run this no command to delete the one we just created in previous scenario, the access list with the same name. And then in the first rule, I deny the source, the whole subnet of the VLAN 200. Here for the destination, this is the new keyword. I say host so that I can only specify one IP address instead of a wildcard. Of course, if you use wildcard, if you give the mask properly, you can achieve the same thing, right? But the host just simplify the way you specify one single IP address. This rule simply say I want to block the access from VLAN 200 to this Synology NAS. Move on to the next command. I want to permit the whole VLAN 200 subnet, permit the access to the VLAN 100. Remember the first rule, block access to this. And then the second rule, permit access to the whole subnet. The first rule has the priority. The end result will be I won't be able to access this Synology, but I should be able to access this PC. Then I have an additional permit because in this scenario, I don't want to say permit any, but I still want to keep the access from my Mac to this VLAN 200 because if I do not specify this third rule, my session here will be blocked as well. So I won't continue this video, right? That's why you see this extra permit command. I simply want to keep the connection between these two open. So I specify the access from the VLAN 200 to this particular IP address. Then exit, I associate it with the VLAN 200. Similarly, using the VLAN 200 inbound. If I show this ACL, you can see it's for inbound VLAN 200. First rule, deny. Second rule, permit. And the third rule, permit. So all the wildcard mask is set up correctly. For example, for the first rule, remember for the destination, I only specify one single address. See what's the wildcard mask? It's R0. R0 means you need to use this exact IP address. Again, a very straightforward ACL. Now let's validate whether it's working or not. Let me try from this VLAN 200, ping this PC. Okay, no problem. I can ping it. Now let's ping this Synology. It's not supposed to be working. Yep, I cannot ping it. Perfect. Because this SSH session is still live, so that's already proved that my third rule works as well. Let's move on to the last scenario. So the third scenario is we only want VLAN 200 to access VLAN 100. Nothing else can access VLAN 100. Let me paste all the commands. First, delete the previous one and create a list with the same name. Now let's examine the first rule. We only want to permit the IP from this source, which is my VLAN 200, and the destination is 100. Just one rule. We only permit this link and we don't permit anything else. We associate this newly created ACL with VLAN 100. Direction is out, which means our ACL will filter the traffic to the devices in this VLAN 100. So we only have one rule in this ACL. Now let's test it. First, from this VLAN 200, let me ping these two machines. First, ping the Synology NAS. Yes, it's working. And ping the PC. Again, working. Okay, we validated these two green links. Now let's validate these two red ones from this session, which is from my local Mac, which is not from VLAN 200, it's from VLAN 1. Now let me try the ping. This time ping the PC first. Blocked. And ping the Synology. Yeah, similarly blocked. Perfect. Everything works as expected. We have finished all the three scenarios. We just configure the changes, but we never really save it. So let's do it now. Let me first exit the config mode. I just run this command to show you that, okay, this IP ACL is still active. Let me exit the configure mode. Now let me run the command write memory. Yeah, let me say yes. Okay, it's saved. The message says config file startup config created successfully. Let me reboot the switch, then go back to the system to see whether we still have this ACL. Now we are in the UniFi controller. For this USW Enterprise X3, let's go to Settings and then find Manage. Yes, we are here. Find the Restart Device. Yeah. Confirm. The switch has been restarted and the original SSH session. Let me log on to it again. Run the command to try to show the ACL. See, I ran this command. It says access list does not exist. It's very disappointing. All the changes we made will be gone once the switch is restarted. For home usage, maybe it's manageable, I don't know, because you can easily paste all the commands all together once the switch restarted. But for business usage, apparently it's not ready for production. I hope this can be fixed in future upgrade.